Welcome back to a new series here on my channel. I'm going to be doing a playthrough of For the People, a Civil War card-driven board game by the great Mark Herman. I've already done a game of his, Empire of the Sun. If you haven't seen it, go and check that one out. I was going to do Next War Poland or Offensive Outrance, and I even tried Offensive Outrance first, and then I realized how in over my head I was, so I actually sold it. And then I tried Next War Poland, and I actually saw that there was a lot of content on that already on YouTube, and I don't see the point in someone like me that's not interested in the subject all that much. Modern Warfare is interesting, but I don't really get it. My expertise is this, not that, and it's just different warfare. So I didn't see the point in someone like me doing that's not as interested in the subject, that doesn't know the rules as well, doing something that somebody else has already done and done better. So I decided to skip those, at least for now. I'll give it a fair shake if you guys really want to see it. But there is already plenty of good stuff out there, and I promise it's better. Go and look for somebody else on that. This game is great. The way I go through board games is I'll play a game like this that's more general, and then I'll want to go to something more advanced. So I had this game, and then I said I want something more. So I got the U.S. Civil War, another GMT game. It's bigger. It's hex movement, not point to point, and it's not card driven. It's based off the Avalon Hill version or Victory Games. I think it's Avalon Hill version, the big monster game, and that one is just really great. But there is something just amazing about this game. The strategic will track is lovely. The way the armies work in this one, I love. That's the thing about the U.S. Civil War game that does not have, is you can just spawn armies, which is just not, it's not how it happened. You didn't just, form up into an army like it was nothing. This game requires you to play cards for the ops points in order to create armies, and that demonstrates the organizational efforts that it took. And then there's the political values on leaders that illustrates how you couldn't just drop in, Polk, for instance, or Beauregard, who have low political values, over someone like Albert Sidney Johnson or Joe Johnson. So, it just illustrates those sort of things, that you may even have a good leader or better than the ones that you would like to put in, especially for the Union. That's more in the case for the Union, whereas someone like McClellan is not a very good leader, or even Fremont and Butler are very high political values. So you'll be penalized for putting in a general that is better but has a lower political value. So is great. But everything in this game is beautifully designed, well balanced. It looks great. And I'd really like to see what they did with Paths of Glory, how they have like this map, and then on the other side they have a different map, like the historical version that I play. If you haven't seen that one, go and check it out. I think this game could use an update. It may have just gotten the new edition, but I think it could look really good with another map. I like this one, and there's something to be said for this design. I just think that historical version, like they have on the Paths of Glory map, would be lovely. But anyways, this is what I'm interested in. This is the Civil War era, and the 19th century is really where my skills are honed. So if you saw in the Paths of Glory and the Empire of the Sun, where, I don't always know the best strategies and everything like that, that is not the case with the Civil War. I know exactly the best strategies, and I understand the game strategy pretty well, because there's different strategies that you can go with depending on cards you get and the different phases of the game and that sort of thing. I'm not exactly great on that, but I do understand it well enough that I can be competent in it. But the actual strategy of the war is something that I can get and won't make some of the mistakes that I make in the other ones. So with all of that said, and an introduction into this game, I can go ahead and do what we normally do. It's going to be pretty much the same as my other videos as far as card driven. So you start off the game in the summer, I think still, or spring of 1861. And it tapers the hand sizes as you go. So you start off in the first turn with 4 cards, next turn with 5, next turn with 6, next turn with 7. And one more thing, the reason I did this game is because there is nothing on it relatively. And I thought this was a fairly popular game, so I was kind of surprised. It's part of his We the People series that Mark Herman released. And I think Callendale is the only one, and he did one like a good few years back. And no one else has really covered this game, so I wanted to also give it some coverage because it deserves it. It's a lovely game. So anyways, I'm going to show you the Confederates' hand first, because they go second always unless they have a campaign card that they play to basically take the initiative. So as far as starting hands go, it's not bad. They have an ambush, which won't be usable because there's no cavalry leaders. They have the USS Monitor, which they can't use because it's a Union event, but it's worth 2. And then they have 2 events that give them SPs, or strength points. So Joshua Gorgas is going to get them, I think, 3, and then this one will get them 2, the Mexican supply pipeline down in Texas. So this is good for the Confederates to be able to get some points on the map, and then use those other ones probably to put down political control markers in the border states. And that's something that's also really cool about this game, as opposed to the U.S. Civil War, in that you do this, dance in the first couple of turns of trying to win over these border states without sometimes physically going in them, such as, in the other one, Kentucky has neutrality. In this one, it's a little bit different, but in this one, you can not even have to be there militarily in order to influence what's going on. So the Union have a terrible hand to start off with. Now, what you'd like to see, terrible is a relative word. It's just not what typically you'd like to see. It can be worked with, absolutely. So typically you'd like to see a lot of high value cards, because that means you can possibly move around, beat up the Confederates in Northern Virginia, and maybe get around Joe Johnson or Beauregard with a good roll. Because there's not a lot of leaders out there, and there's no good leaders out there, really, besides. I mean, McDowell's not awful, but anyways, if you have a high mobility hand, then you can maneuver your way and find some opportunities to perhaps steal either, possibly even Richmond. That would be difficult to do on the first 2 turns, but you may be able to do something. But they unfortunately do not have this. They have Wilson's Raid, which is unplayable because there are no cavalry leaders, cavalry brigades. Mosby's Raiders cannot be used because it's a Confederate event. Hunley cannot be used because it's a Confederate event. And then Belmont. Now, this one's actually not bad, and this may be used in West Virginia to pick up that state, because that's the one the Union can normally pick up pretty easily without much of a problem. So, just to give you a general overview of what I'm going to be doing here, the Union strategy is pretty standard. It's going to be in the first 2 turns, because turn 3 we don't get reinforcements. I'm going to just try and win over West Virginia and move into Missouri, and then in Northern Virginia we're going to force a battle there. I'm not sure where it's going to be, but we're going to force a battle there. And then next turn we're going to get reinforcements, leaders, and then we'll use those leaders to start driving down the Tennessee and the Cumberland River, down through Dover, put pressure on Albert Sidney Johnston, and he'll probably go into Kentucky, which is pretty standard. So we can maybe threaten Nashville from the rear, and then also test these other areas along the river, because if we can catch the Confederates out before they manage to get some forts built up along the Mississippi River, then we're in a good spot. For the Confederates, it's just the opposite. We're going to make some incursions into Missouri using Price, maybe force a battle with Fremont, probably defensively if we can help it. And then Johnson will likely make a foray into Kentucky. It's just standard moves. If we can get out there and grab that, it's 10 strategic will points. And then we're going to just hold the line in Virginia. We're going to get some strength points, and be able to hold our own there, and maybe launch an attack against either Harper's Ferry or the units in West Virginia. And we'll pick and choose exactly what we do with that. But that's pretty much the standard setup. Nothing revolutionary there. We'll get in. Maybe I'll spring something unexpected later. But we're going to go ahead and jump in with the Union. Okay, so for the opening turns here, we had the Union go ahead and jump out and move these 2 strength points down into West Virginia, which will be enough to convert that neutral state. That would represent McClellan's forces coming down from Pittsburgh before he was promoted. Then the Confederates responded by sending Johnston north into Frankfort. They're only 2 away from having the amount to take Kentucky, and the Union aren't going to be able to respond because of the low count they have in their the hand they have. But especially considering that they don't have any leaders, really. The only leader in the West is Fremont, and he's not very good. So they're not going to be able to respond to Kentucky. Then back over to the Union, who, since they do have a low hand, decide to use the operational Q, which is optional in this game, but I don't see the point in not using it. So it works just as in any other game, really. You drop in except this is not put into a general pool. This is put on a specific leader, and then you have to use it the next turn. So like basically what we've done here is we've prepped McDowell for an attack. He's getting organized. He's getting ready to move, and then we're going to give him the order here in a second. But that just helps in some of these situations like this. So he's going to be mobilized for an attack, and we will spend the extra point to move the Army of the Potomac. So we're going to come here to Frederick, and we're actually going to drop a strength point. So we had 5 to start with. We're going to drop 1 in Frederick, if I can flip this over, to bolster the defenses. The Confederates cannot cross here because it's a river. The Potomac separates them, so they'd have to come through Frederick. So down to 4 strength points, they're going to come here and pick up 2 more. So they're at 6. And then they're going to attack Harper's Ferry. So Johnson has 2 strength points, and the forces under McDowell have 6 total. So it's going to be a medium battle. In this game, unlike other games, there is only 3 columns, large, medium, and small battles, which is interesting because there's not quite as much of fretting over having exactly 8 or not wanting to lose some because of the column shift that you'll get, having 8 rather than 7 or something like that. So this is much more lenient on that. I'm not sure what it represents historically, but it's an interesting system that I like. So we have a pretty high, the highest roll you can get for either of the sides. 6 and a 6. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the CRT and back it up. Medium. The attacker rolls a 6, which is going to be modified by 1. He's a +1, which will give him a 2. The defender rolls a 6, which is modified by 2 because Johnston has a +2. So it's going to be a draw in the space. And since they have the asterisk next to theirs, the defenders, they're going to win. But he'll be eliminated. And Johnson will go back to the track to come in next turn. And the Potomac will go down to 4 strength points. The way it works with this is if the defender is eliminated and they have a fort or a general, if they have a fort, then you can advance. If they have a general, then you can advance, but you cannot do any after combat movement. So they can take the spot, but they can't move anymore. So successful in taking out Johnson, but it's not exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to come back and then hit again from Frederick to Manassas and do 2 attacks with the full strength of all the forces in the east, really, to combine and hit both of them in one turn, which is pretty standard opening move. The ideal part here would be that I could then send McDowell again to come around, or could pick up these and could attack again, but we don't have the operation points for that. We just don't exist. So that will do it for the Union. They have 1 more card. The Confederates themselves have 2. And they're going to use it to activate Johnston in Kentucky. Would really like to have used the Mexican supply line for the points for the event, but they can't do that. Or they're not going to do that. So they will butt up here to Cincinnati. If I can just pick up these 2 here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or they have 8, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they'll sit in Falmouth. And they'll be over the requisite number of spaces to take Kentucky. They basically took the whole thing. Johnson just goes up on a raid. So Kentucky will go over to the Confederates. And then the Union just have left Mosby's Raiders 1. Can't do much with it. So they're going to activate a division and send it into Missouri. Or they could always just, they'll just drop down a political control marker. And they'll drop it down here in St. Joseph. Just to get a start in Missouri. Missouri is the hardest one to get because they're kind of weirdly spread out, and there's also a lot of them to get. So then it comes back to the Confederates, who have a 1 card themselves, which can't really be done for much else besides also place a political control marker. And they'll do that down here in Greenville. So that will wrap it up for the summer of 61. I'll go ahead and continue on to the fall turn with a new hand, and we'll keep trucking. And I just wanted to show you this for those that haven't seen how this system works. I really love the strategic will. It's just a beautiful, beautiful system. So we do the border states. We check control for the border states. And because they have 4 of the 7 spaces, the Union will take control of West Virginia, and they're going to get a 5-point strategic will boost. So, and then also the same in Kentucky, because they control 7 of the 9. The Confederacy will have control of Kentucky. So now taking a look down here at the strategic will track, this is just beautiful. So the Union are at 100 minus. So there, it's called the Fortunes of War. So they're in a minus Fortunes of War. So they're going to get 5 for West Virginia, but because they're going from a minus to a plus, they're going to get a bonus +2. So actually they're going to get a 7. And then the Confederates will just get a straight up 10 because they're already at, they're already in the plus for their Fortunes of War. So at 110. And the impact is worse if you're going from plus to minus. If you're going from plus to minus, it's a -3 to switch it back. So that can really hurt sometimes to go back and forth with that. But it's a really cool system. One that I wish the U.S. Civil War, the other GMT game, had, because that one is just having to keep up with victory points, which I understand, because you're constantly basically having to continue to advance the war. But the system is just so much better. So much better. Overall. So we're going to do reinforcements and everything and be back. Alright, here we are in the summer 1861 turn, and just did the reinforcements and everything, and even that in this game is a delight, just because of the way it works, the way that both sides were very different. In the north, the Union, you get 6 or 8 here, 6 here, 4 here. You just kind of get dropped in lumps, and then you can decide your strategic movement, what goes where. In the South, it's different in that each state has its own, which represents, each state kind of mustering their own units. It's kind of the military difference between the two. This is kind of one of the last wars that you see. It goes on later, but this is probably one of the last major wars that you see individual state units fighting. And that Union model is kind of implemented more than the Southern model, which is, individual states raising their own units. So each state gets a unit. And then you have to move them around, as well as the blockade runners, which the blockade's not really in effect yet, so that's easy. It's actually free. And then you get to place the generals, which is my favorite part. That's my favorite part about this game, is the organization side, deciding who's going to go where, setting up for armies coming along later. So just to briefly do some stuff, plan on getting the Army of Northern Virginia, and I want Joe Johnston to lead that. I gave him, obviously, Stuart, and Beauregard's already there. Kirby Smith is going to lead the forces in the Shenandoah. Pope is coming here in Charleston. Buell and Burnside are going to make up the Army of the Tennessee, opposed by Albert Sidney Johnston and Braxton Bragg, who are going to make the Army of Tennessee. And then Halleck will lead the Army of the Cumberland. It's going to be around the Army of the Tennessee, and that'll be the Army of the Cumberland. And then Fremont's still where he is, but just getting to pick where those guys are going to go is that's my favorite part of the whole game. Let's go ahead and show you the hands now. So for the Confederates first, have the Orphan Brigade. Not great, but it's a point. Ironclad building, it puts up the amphibious assault, which obviously they're not going to be looking at, but Gustavus Fox is a very interesting story. Confederate scientists, more points, they're going to get more strength points. Empty haversacks, obviously not going to be used because it's a Union event. And then Overseas Agent, once again, another strength point. Seeing 3 cards in here can give you strength points, which is, I mean, it's not bad for the Confederates, really. And then these 2 can be used to activate some other generals. And for the Union, they have an interesting hand. They've got Ball's Bluff, which won't be used. Food shortage, which is useless at this point. Locomotive shortage, which can eliminate a card. That's kind of nice. Copperheads, which won't get played. And then the Emancipation Proclamation. So we have to force a medium battle, but if they can do so, that's going to be really interesting. So that's the hands, and let's see how it goes. So the Union's going to try and force this battle early, and by moving the Army of the Potomac, they're going to leave McDowell in command for now. I do have a plan for what's going to happen there eventually, but as of right now, we're going to leave McDowell in command. And he's going to march 1, 2, 3, and pick up the 9 strength points in Washington. We'll put them to a total of 12. And then they're going to launch their attack from D.C. into Manassas. While the numbers are good and while they don't have an army, because when there's not an army, it's still considered a corps, I believe, and then they can only use the rating of 1 of the generals, as far as I know. Because they have 5 strength points and 3 generals, and I know you're good as long as there's not more generals than there are strength points. So I'll double check that real quick just to make sure. Yep, so it's the general with the highest political value, which is Johnson, but they only get to use his value, whereas if they had an army, they could use everyone's, because you can use 2 subordinates. So they want to get this in now before it's really tough to attack them. So it's going to be 5 strength points with a 2 bonus. Then the army is going to get to use 12 strength points with a +1 and 2 subordinates. Well, Rosecrans, McClellan, and Banks are the subordinates. So Rosecrans is the only one with a bonus, so they're going to get a +2. So it'll be a +2 for both sides. And obviously this is going to be still a medium battle, because they don't quite, it's going to be 12 against 5. But it would be enough if they can win to get off the Emancipation Proclamation. So double 3s, and we'll take a look at the CRT. So medium, attacker rolls a 3, +2 is a 1, defender 3, +2 is a 1. So they both can have 1, which means that this goes down to a 4, and they'll go down from 12 to 11. So because it's a draw, it cannot be considered a victory, obviously. And that means that the card is not eligible for play, which is unfortunate. So that's pretty much your Battle of Manassas there. A basic draw, but a win for the defenders, except this was obviously a much larger force and a little bit later than historical. But it's going to be unfortunate because they don't have any other high cards, as is pretty typical. It seems like they have some 2s, some 1s, and a 3. But they really want to get this out, so they may do an Operation Q and play these 2 here. and then activate somebody. But then again, they want to get that an army built too. So it's just a matter of when we're going to get this to come back up. Because if we don't play it now, it might not come up again. So we can always create an army, but we won't always be able to play a Emancipation Proclamation. So we're going to do our best to get that out. Just to continue to praise this strategic will system. So the Confederates are not going to let that happen again. They're going to go ahead and create the Army of Northern Virginia, appointing Joe Johnston as the head. And he has a political value of 8, which is higher than anyone in the space, but not the highest on the map. So when you create an army, you will have to look at the political values of everyone across the map. Now, Albert Sidney Johnston has a 10, and Johnston has an 8. So you're going to lose 2 strategic will points because of that. So if we go over here to the strategic will table, they were at 110, but because they went from a plus to a minus, that 2 turns into a -5. So it actually kind of compounds things. So the idea was that I wanted to give Johnston an army first, Albert Sidney Johnston, and then give Joe Johnston his next to negate that, but didn't quite. I don't want to get caught in that situation again where we're having to only use one, because it's basically impossible to win versus the Army of Northern Virginia now, because there's just so many, but they're going to have a +5 bonus, and then another +1 or 2 for the cavalry, and it's just, that is going to be impossible to win. So they wanted to lock that up, so they're willing to take the 5 strength point loss, but once again, that system is just lovely. So I don't want to give the Confederates any more time to build up, so I used the 2 card to activate Pope, because we have an interesting situation here. So we're going to march Pope and his 2 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, over to Cincinnati. And there are a few too many units here, but it's not a problem. So now the way it works is, whenever there is multiple leaders, the person with the highest political value is the commanding general. But that's not the case when there's an active general. When there's an active general, the active general is the one who is in command of the forces. So it doesn't really matter, because they're going to leave behind Buell and Burnside. But they could have taken Buell and Burnside with them or something else. But they don't care too much about this, really. So they're going to march Pope across, give him a corps to attack Johnson. And this is nice because it's going to be 1 +1 bonus plus a +1 bonus. And it's going to be 6 strength points against 5 strength points. So a pretty even fight, but we're still looking to get that victory in the medium-sized or large-sized battle, which is what this will be. So +1 for both sides, and the Union need a victory. Looks like they'll probably get one. 5 and a 1, very fortuitous roll. So, going to do medium. And then with the roll of a 5 plus 1 is a 6. The roll of a 1 plus 1 is a 1. So actually, 1, still only 1. So thwarted again, they would have needed a 6 in order to get that off. Actually, this attack over here, I just realized, was probably wrong. Because we should have added some force ratio die roll modifiers. I'll get to that in just a second. So it's going to be 1 and 1, so the attack fails. Johnston is going to go down to 4. And Pope will go down to 5. But anyways, looking back over here, this attack, I just noticed some die roll modifiers that I didn't see before. There's force ratio die roll modifiers. If it's 3 to 1, 4 to 1, or 5 to 1. So let me see. This was 5 against 12. So no, it's okay. They would be fine. They won't get any more die roll modifiers because it wasn't 3 to 1. It would be 3 to 1 now because the Confederates have 4 and the Union they should have 11. So no, it wouldn't be still. So never mind, they still are unable to get it. I just wanted to make sure because that changes everything. But this attack as well does not go over. So Pope will have to go back to Cincinnati, and Johnson will have the opportunity to create an army, and still they can't get that win. It's the problem. Which is why having this card come up early is not great, because it's just hard to get wins in medium battles. I could, duke it out with a couple of small battles, but when you start to get into these medium battles, it's just hard with the die roll modifiers that you have. Going in these head-to-head combats, it's better to attack small forces with large forces because they just can't hold everything, rather than taking your large forces and attacking their large forces. The medium battles are just not great. It's better for 1862, 1863 when they historically happened, rather than here in the early parts. So tried to make it work, but it's just not going to be possible. Okay, so I wrapped up the end of this turn. Not much happened. The Union and Confederates just added in some political control markers in Missouri. Not enough to take the state. And then the Union created the Army of the Cumberland, which they decided to put Ambrose Burnside, at the commanding general's position. The original plan was Buell, but they both have a 6 on the political value, so Burnside's is not as good attackingly, but he has a lower activation number. And as long as they're in an army, they'll be able to use Buell's number anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. And Pope's in there as well, but I like to use him as a corps commander that can kind of detach and do his own thing because he does have such a low activation number. But we'll see about that. They have 8 strength points right now. So that wraps up summer 1861. We'll go on to the fall now, and this is when the 90-day reinforcements run up. So there will be no reinforcements for either side, which isn't really bad for the Union and is normally bad for the Confederates, but they actually got to place 6 strength points on the map using cards from this past turn. And also one thing, the Emancipation Proclamation did not get played, but it does get reshuffled back in. Now this is a huge deck, so who knows when it will come back up, but it will most likely be later in the war. Plus all the cards we've already used will go back in there as well. So we're going to be starting with literally a fresh deck, because no one has played anything yet that removes it from the game. So fresh deck going into the third turn, fall of 1861. Okay, so no reinforcements, but the new leaders are out. Van Dorn will be in Little Rock. I'm going to get him and Price to try and maneuver around Fremont in Missouri and take the state, because that's very important to have those 10 strategic will points. And then Pemberton went into Dover because he's a good defensive leader. So we want to protect that, because that's going to be the choke point for the Cumberland and the Tennessee River. Can't have that falling. So let's take a look at the hands, and this is really starting to ramp up, and these are very interesting. So here's a minor campaign. So the Union always goes first unless the Confederates basically use a campaign card to take the initiative, which they can do. I can't see them doing that, but I mean, it might be worth it to do a minor campaign and send maybe Price and Van Dorn out or something. I don't think they're going to do it. Strategy board, Union card, cannot be used. Crisis in the West. Good that the Confederates had this. The CSS Virginia, which may or may not come out. The Western Concentration Block. This one's interesting, a little bit complicated. They can basically change the leadership around in a army in the West, or they can move 5 strength points to a place. Usually, I don't know if it has to be in the West. I don't think it does. and then can do an attack. So basically, you can just concentrate forces and launch a large attack. I guess this would simulate something like Shiloh. But I don't think there are 5 strength points to do this with, unless they pulled it from the east, which is just a no-go. So, and then they have a major campaign, which will be interesting. I think they're going to probably hold those till the end and then decide what to do with them, because that's the problem early on, is there's just not enough strength points on the board to do all of this stuff with. So you kind of just have to, smaller cards are kind of good. So for the Union, they have Valley Devastation. They only control one of the 3 Shenandoah Valley spaces, but if they control all 3, they can destroy them. And that's important for control of the state as well as supply. They have themselves a major campaign, which is much more likely to be used. Coordinated movement is really better for the Union than it is for the Confederates. Ball's Bluff, which can be used. Galveston, which can't be used. Confederate inflation, it's nice. They'll probably hold this late in hopes that the Confederates will get a boost, and then they can just take it back down with the inflation. And then Admiral Foote. This is really good, and it could be used for a naval attack using Halleck, or maybe even dispatching Pope from the Army of the Cumberland, and or even in the east. It could dispatch somebody like Rosecrans and have him come down and in assault somewhere like Fernandina, or maybe one of these forts. I doubt one of the forts, because they're a little bit harder to crack, but they could even come all the way down and maybe try and break into Fort St. Philip and Jackson and open up that southern route, because there's nothing protecting. Basically, that would open the Mississippi up all the way to Columbus. So the Confederates have got to start thinking about that too. That's going to be their primary focus, is building the army that they need with Johnston, and then getting forts along the Mississippi in preparation. So they're not going to trump first and take their action. They're going to leave it to the Union to go first and see what they do. So the Union is going to open up with Admiral Foote, and the idea here is that they can do kind of like a duo attack by or a leapfrog by sending in Halleck to hit Columbus, and then if they can take Columbus, that opens up the entire Mississippi all the way down to the Gulf. Then they can send Pope down with some forces and have him go anywhere. So he may land down in Vicksburg or hit Memphis or something like that. He can go in behind the lines and swoop down in, which would allow them to move a lot quicker up into the Mississippi. So this one's very crucial. And if they do get it, the Confederates can probably seal it off. But they're going to get a +2 modifier for the Foote card, no modifier for the amphibious assault because they haven't had any cards come out. And the Confederates will get a +2 for the fort, but they don't have the leader, and the odds are 3-1. So it'll be another +2. So it'll be a total of +4 for the Union and a +2 for the Confederates. This is going to be a small battle. So not ideal. 6 and a 4. So the Confederates may get away with this one here. So we're going to be in the small battle. The attacker has, let me just zoom out. The attacker in a small battle rolls a 4 and then gets a +4, which would be down to an 8. And then the defender has a 6. Yep. Which will move down to an 8. And it's 1 and 1 with the defender winning. But the way it works is this will be destroyed. Since there's a fort, this place stays. And they'll have to take a loss and retreat back to Cairo, which I believe is how you say it. I know there's dispute. They'll have to retreat. Oh, actually, there should be one more +1 for. Let's see, 2 for this, 2 for the one, so it should be +5. But I don't think that matters because they had a 4. +5 would be 9. Yeah, so it still doesn't matter. They would need 1 more plus in order to get up to 2, which they just don't quite quite have. So that fort is going to remain there, but it's going to be unoccupied, so that allows for possibly Pope to come in. So not a success, but not a failure either. And Confederates will probably send up Polk to hold the line. All right, so a couple turns have gone by. They were positioned here and here, kind of facing off over the Ohio River. So Burnside decided to outflank Johnston, coming around into Frankfort, and so then Johnston repositioned to put himself in between Burnside and Nashville, and cut off his supply as well, which will have to be remedied. But the Union is about to spring one of their campaign cards, but wants to make an adjustment first to leadership. So we're going to make a change over here. So we're going to play a 1 card to relieve McDowell. But we're just going to demote him. We're not going to remove him because he's a fairly decent general. So we're going to lose 6 strategic will points for that. We were at 102. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's going to be down to 96 now. So we're at 96. And the Confederates are at 105. And they're going to promote McClellan. Now, McClellan gets a lot of hate, but I actually quite like him. And in this game, he gets a little bonus in order to help replicate what it is exactly that he does. So first of all, you get a one-time 5-point strategic will bonus for promoting him to making him commander of the Army of the Potomac as long as he is within a couple hexes of Washington, D.C., which is the case. So we're going to get a +5, and since we're in the minus and we're going to a plus, that's going to actually give us a +2 and give us a 7. So we're going to go back up. We're going to be at 103 now. So we actually ended up gaining a strategic will point for doing that, for switching that around. And also we get bonus strength points during the reinforcements phase because of the sort of organizer that he was, a grand organizer. Set up this incredible plan, very detailed grand plan in order to take the South that required just hundreds and thousands of men in his army, and he had to figure out a way to combine them, put them into he basically just took the army that was under McDowell, which was rather unorganized, and then turned it into a proper fighting force. I mean, and he, of course, moved his army of tens of thousands, even 100,000 during the Peninsula Campaign, and managed to transport them, organize them, put them into a fighting force, and march all the way to Richmond. So really was a tactical, organizational genius, even though he did have some of his flaws personally and militarily. But I do actually like him in command of the Potomac. I don't know. I'll probably leave him in there until Grant comes, honestly, because Meade is actually a good alternative. But Meade doesn't come around to the summer of 63. Grant doesn't come around to the spring of 63. So unlike historically, I don't see relieving him. He's so expensive to relieve, and I don't. Maybe if we get a large battle that he loses, the penalty is halved in that case. So maybe if we get into a big scuffle with the Army of Northern Virginia, I could see it. But at this point, I like McClellan there. But this is going to be important for an upcoming move as far as this major campaign goes. So the Union's going to open up with their major campaign now, which allows them to do 3 moves, or 1 special naval move, which is a possibility. They could go down and threaten Richmond with the Army of the Potomac, which isn't a bad idea, but there are other major campaigns, and so we're going to hold off on that for now. So it's going to be 3 separate attacks, and we'll start in the east. So the reason I wanted McDowell out as a head of the army is because I wanted to send him on his own foray. So we're going to give him a corps with the command of 4 strength points, which puts the total army strength down to 6 and gives 4 to McDowell. He will then march out of DC. 1, 2, 3, and he will strike at Kirby Smith, who both of them, I believe that's Kirby Smith. I don't know of any other Smiths, but they'll both have a +1 here. So an even combat, except he has 4. Now, if he was to take those two with him, he'd have 6. Then they would get 3-to-1 odds, which would even help even better. So he's actually going to take these troops in Frederick too, and actually end up with 6 total strength points. I'm not too worried about Johnston running up through this gap, because we can just cut his supply. He can do what he wants in the north, but he can't do much without his supply. So, let him go. This is just important when defending DC. So it's going to be 6 against 2, I believe. Yep, 6 against 2, which is going to get us that 3-to-1 bonus, plus McDowell's 1, so we'll get a +3, whereas the Confederates will only get a +1, and it will be a medium battle. So decent roll, 4 and a 2. And so we'll take a look here. Under medium, attacker 4 plus, 6. Sorry, they rolled a 4. Plus a 3 will be a 7, so that's 2. And then the defender has 2. Yep. Plus 1 is a 3. So they do outright actually win this one. +2 for the 3-to-1, and +1 there. So they'll lose 2, which will eliminate Smith. He'll go on the track. And then McDowell will advance, losing himself just 1 strength point. And he can't advance. I don't know if he can take the space. If I guess it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. He would still have enough to take the space. It just says his movement ends. So we'll say that he can't take the space. We'll just say his movement ends, in which case it would still be a movement point to do anything. So he'll occupy this, and this is nice because on the next turn, actually I don't think the cards will let us, not quite. If we could take Staunton, then we could do the Valley Devastation. So we may, it's going to be difficult to get to do that, which is disappointing that, well, no, we didn't draw. We won. So we should, as long as we're double. So that, ignore all of that. That was if we tied. So yeah, we can still advance after combat. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 6 total. We can do 5, 6. So we're still in a bit of a predicament because we don't quite have enough. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, we have 8 because we're a core. I've really gotten all of this wrong. So yeah, we won. So we can still advance as long as we were double the opponent, which is true. We have 8 movement points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we take the valley, and then McDowell will advance back 1 into Strasburg. So that's a major success to start off. Sorry you couldn't see that down there. But we have the valley now, and we can play that Valley Devastation card to really ratchet things up. So here with the Cumberland, it's a pretty even fight. 6 on 6. But they have a +2 die roll modifier as compared to the Johnston still does not have an army, so it'll just be a +1. So they're going to keep pressing just to keep at us. We're going to get a +1 here. Oh, sorry, +1. They're going to move and do this here. So it's going to be 6 against 6. Bragg is there as well, but he's not going to count for anything. So this is a medium battle, and they're even on strength. And +2 for the Union, +1 for the Confederates. This one, not as great. The roll, a little bit worse. So that on the medium table, that 1 will be changed to a 3, which is a 1, and that 3 will be changed to a 4, which is a 1. So 1 and 1 each, which is fine. So the one thing you can't be afraid to do as the Union player is expend trade-off strength points. It's kind of like Empire of the Sun, in that you have replacements. You can afford to lose more than your opponent because we get way more than the Confederates do. So we can burn some. And then the last one is going to involve Halleck. He's going to do his same attack, but he's going to do it by land. So he's going to march 1, 2, take Paducah, and then launch an attack on Columbus. Now, I don't believe that the Virginia plays a role. The Confederates put the Virginia into Columbus to help defend it from amphibious assault, but it does not apply to ground combat, which I can kind of see because naval support wasn't quite developed at this point. It is later during amphibious assault, but you didn't see it quite as much in coordination with ground attacks. I think it was possible that it could have been, but it's not represented in the rules. So they're going to get a +2 for the ground, and then Halleck is going to have 4 to 2, and he's going to get a +1 himself. So they would like to have a few more forces to bring along here, but it is what it is. So it's going to be 4 against 2, and the dice rolls not in favor of the Union. 6 and a 4, which will be modified to an 8 for the defenders. So we're going to go to the medium battle again. So the defenders are going to have an 8, which will be devastatingly a 2. And then the Union have a 4, but the +1 is only a 6, so just a 1. So Leonidas Polk holds on in Columbus. And Halleck is going to take some pretty rough losses. But overall, the other attacks weren't as successful, but taking the valley is huge. Because especially since we have that devastation card, to be able to eliminate those as supply hexes is big time, especially so early in the war. So while the overall wasn't a huge success, it was enough as a success to have merited having done it. The Confederates are going to respond with a major campaign of their own. It's going to start out here in the west, involving Missouri. So Price is going to lead things off. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to set up a defense against Fremont in case he decides to come out of St. Louis and try and thwart this. Then Van Dorn's going to come in behind him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And he'll just sit in Lexington. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is more than they need to take Missouri. Which they really would like to do. And then the last will involve here in the east. Thinking about just attacking, since we have a line here to Staunton, we're going to go in and, to Strasburg, we're going to attack McDowell. We have 7 with a +4. McDowell has 1 with 5 total. So we can really crank up those numbers on the die roll modifiers, which is what happens with especially the Army of Northern Virginia. Get some good leaders in there, and they can just pretty much take any force that they want. And the die rolls make it even better for the Confederates of a 6 and a 1. So take a look here on the medium. The attacker is going to have a 6 plus 4 is 10. Now that's worrisome because they're going to have to roll for a lead or loss, and don't really want to lose Beauregard or Stuart. But they're going to have 3. The defender, which is always the worry when you do this, the defender rolls a 1 plus 1 is a 2. So the Army of Northern Virginia will lose 1 and go down to a 6 rather than a 7. They will lose 3 and go from a 5 to a 2. And they will have to retreat. They're going to retreat to Winchester. And now, I don't know what the advance after combat is, because obviously they don't want to fully do that, because they weren't more than double. I think you have to be both more than double before and afterwards in order to do movement after combat, but I could take a look at it here. Naval retreats, yada yada yada, battle casualties. I guess it's in regular movement. Movement restrictions, armies, command, number of generals. Here, I'll find it and come back. So they advance, and I think they have to advance. I don't think they can choose not to, which is a bit unfortunate because I didn't want to, obviously, but they cannot advance because they cannot continue to move because we were not more than double their strength at the beginning of the combat. So that kind of leaves this open, but it's not too big of a concern because if you keep your supply, you can't make it to Richmond in one move. Now they could just march down there and attack without, keeping supply, which is a possibility, but I don't even think that they have a card that they can activate them with. So it was a risk, but it was one worth taking because they can retake those spaces. And actually, the Death Valley Devastation card was a little bit different. You actually physically have to occupy with infantry all 3 spaces, not just control. So you would have had to have left troops along the way, which could have been reconciled. But anyways, they're not going to get to do that now. So the Union have no cards to activate the army to take advantage of this. So they're going to lose Missouri if they are not careful. But they also can't activate Fremont. They could play 2 cards and try to do something about that. Or they could send Halleck over even, which is probably a better bet. They're going to need all 3. But they also don't want to lose Missouri at this point. So they're going to play a 2 into the operations queue onto Halleck over here in the west. Have him go and attack Price at some point. The Confederates created the Army of Tennessee and put Albert Sidney Johnston as the head, which does not cause any strategic will problems because he's the highest rated general. And by the way, I think we earlier missed doing a leader roll, casualty roll. So we're going to have to roll that up. Just remembered it. I think it's on... I get the rules for this one and rules for the U.S. Civil War mixed up because they are so similar. So if either or both players rolls a 10 or greater, then a general casualty must occur. All generals present unless exempted by an event, or eligible for the general casualties. Yada yada yada, but it doesn't give me the number that I roll in the case of that. Casualties to generals. The die roll results. Player had a 50% chance of losing a subordinate. Because the Union rules, the leader casualties are calculated. Is what it says. The Union player has a 50% chance of losing a subordinate. The Confederate only has a 16% of the die roll results in, but it doesn't tell me. Okay. So if an attack is made odds of 1 to 3 or less, the attacker is out of supply, or the attacker is out of supply, then no defender. So the odds were made odds of 1 to 3 or less. So it was 1, I'm trying to think here, 1 to 3 or less. So it definitely wasn't more than 3 to 1. So yeah, so there's no defender casualty roll. So the attacker will still make one. Our focus is over here now. Each player who's eligible, blah, 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 will determine. Player that rolled the modified 10 loses a general die of 1 to 3. Player that did not roll the modified 10, the commanding general of an army, is never killed. If several generals could be killed, determine their death randomly. So basically on a 1 to 3, the Confederates lose a random general from the Army of Northern Virginia, but the Union does not have to because the odds were 3 to 1 or less, I believe, or 1 to 3. Well, no, they were even odds. See, 1 to 3 would be like 1 and 1. I'm not sure. They would only get it on a 1, so I'm not that concerned about it. So they're going to roll it on a 1 to 3. They lose somebody, and they roll a 4, thankfully. So they're not going to lose anybody, because they did not want to lose Beauregard or Stuart. Sometimes it's okay, but in many cases you don't want to do it. Okay, so the Union played a 1 to activate Halleck, to finish activating Halleck. He's going to march with his 2 strength points, less than I thought, and go 1, 2, 3, 4, pick up Fremont, and then attack here with their total of 5. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So they would have it anyway. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll attack from here. And it's 5 against 2, which means that we will be able to advance after combat if we win. So the total strength will constitute a medium battle. And it'll be +1 for the attacker, +1 for the defender. And another lopsided roll, but it's good for the Union this time. And it's going to be 2 and 5. So actually, it'll be on the medium. So a 6 +1 is a 2, and a 2 +1 is a 1. So that will eliminate Price. And he'll have to go onto the track for next turn. They can still advance because they had more than double at the beginning. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they can flip Rolla. Which will leave them in a nice spot. Because now it's not going to be possible for the Confederates to take Missouri. So that's a good way to end the turn for them. Plus, they'll get a win. And to finish things off this turn, the Confederates are going to play a minor campaign, which they're going to use Van Dorn and go in behind and say 1 to flip 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which will cut off supply to Halleck. And then he will end his movement. You go to either one of these spaces, go back to St. Louis, but that's going to force combat, so he'll go to Greenville. And that will be enough to take the state. So, you know, there was always a chance that that was going to happen. Even if they would have ended their movement here, I don't think it would have mattered, because he would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it would have been enough anyways. So it didn't really matter what they did. And then the other half of it was going to be just simply moving the Army of Northern Virginia. It's going to go 1, 2. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Retake those 2 spaces and reposition themselves back in Manassas. So that'll do it for the 1861 turn. Not a whole lot. The Confederates, I'll go ahead and do the strategic phase, and that will mean that all the border states have been taken. And that's good for the Confederates. They managed to get 2, because that's 20 strategic will points that they obviously didn't have. So they're at 117. The Union is at 103, which is a good pace for them after the first year. Haven't suffered any major losses, still holding on to the Mississippi, and the Union kind of in a bit of disarray at this point. It looked like McDowell was going to really be able to punch through, but the Army of Northern Virginia is able to stabilize you so much because it's just such a good fighting force. But once they manage to get some numbers back in next turn, get some reinforcements, then they're going to really start pounding away at the Confederates and start launching some naval attacks, taking the pressure away from some of these main fronts and distributing that pain to other places. So that's 1861. Thanks for watching.